Hello beautiful people, it's Michelle and welcome back to my channel. For any of you who may be new here, I teach 4th grade math, science, and social studies in Maryland, and I just finished up my 4th year of teaching. Any of you who have been following me for a while know that last summer I actually moved district schools and grade levels all at the same time. Now before I switched to 4th grade, I actually spent 3 years teaching 2nd grade, and when I made that switch, I started getting a lot of questions about the differences between the two grade levels, so today's video is going to be all about comparing 2nd grade and 4th grade. Now just a little bit of background knowledge. I did intern when I was in college in 1st grade, 3rd grade, and 5th grade, and then I have 3 years experience teaching 2nd grade and 1 year experience teaching 4th grade like I just mentioned. So that's why I'm choosing to compare 2nd grade and 4th grade, just because those are the ones that I have the most experience in. Now my plan is to keep this very simple, very casual. I'm just gonna kind of talk to you all, but I have decided to split it into 4 different sections. First, I'm gonna talk about differences in the actual students and kind of their behaviors and their mannerisms. Second, I'm gonna talk about differences in classroom management. Third, I'm going to talk about differences in the content, and then fourth, I'm going to actually tell you which one I prefer. So first, let's actually talk about differences between the students. Obviously, when I switched to 4th grade, the students were 2 years older, and one of the first things that I noticed is that they were so much more independent. They were just able to do a lot more on their own, and they didn't ask me as many questions, which honestly made my life a lot easier as a teacher because I could spend more time working with the students who needed my help as opposed to just answering questions left and right. Especially when it came to independent work, my 4th graders were able to do a lot more on their own, and they didn't ask as many questions, which gave me more time to be able to work with the students who really needed my one-on-one support. One of the next things that I noticed is that my 4th graders were extremely helpful, and actually now that I'm saying that, my 2nd graders were helpful too. My 2nd graders were every bit as helpful as my 4th graders. I think the difference is my 4th graders are just able to do a lot more to help me versus my 2nd graders. My 4th graders seriously kept my classroom running, and I loved them for that. They really got to know me and my organizational style, and they would do things without me even having to ask them to help, and it really took a lot of getting used to for me to kind of relinquish that control to them, because with my 2nd graders, I did almost everything by myself, and I did have kids help me here and there, and they had little classroom jobs, but they weren't able to do as much to help me as my 4th graders. But once I got used to how much my 4th graders could actually help me with, I never went back, and from that moment on, my 4th graders seriously took control of so much in my room, and I was so thankful for it. 4th graders also understand sarcasm so much better than my 2nd graders. I am very sarcastic when I teach. It's just kind of my personality, and when I would do that with my 2nd graders, some of them would get it, but some of them would like look at me and they were either really confused or they thought I was being mean and they just didn't get it. But my 4th graders get it and they play back into it, which I love because they can be just as sarcastic with me as I am with them. It makes my teacher heart so happy. I also felt like I could form deeper relationships with my 4th graders. Anyone who watches my classroom vlogs knows that I talk a lot about forming relationships with students. That's always been something very, very important to me, and I did feel like I could form deeper relationships with my 4th graders. I did form relationships with my 2nd graders, but it was very different from the relationships that I had with my 4th graders. I feel like with the older students, you're just able to impact them on a more personal level, and as they start to get older and they're starting to develop their own personalities more, and they're starting to need more advice from older people, and I felt like I could really be a role model for them, and I loved that. I felt like a lot of the things that I talked to my 2nd graders about to form the relationships was a lot more just basic things, you know, their interests, their favorite things to do, whereas with my 4th graders, I felt like I was really able to like give them advice, and they would come to me when they weren't sure about things and they needed to talk to me about something, whether it was an issue with friends or something at home. Like, I loved being able to be that for them because I think that that is so important as a teacher. Like, yes, I'm here to give them an education, I'm here to give them content, I'm here to help them learn and grow and support them, but I also want to be able to be a part of their life, and I want to be a positive influence on their life. So I just felt like I had more of that power with the older students versus the younger students. Now, a couple of things that I do miss about my 2nd graders is that they get excited so easily about the smallest things, and that was just so magical to see. I also got a lot more hugs with my 2nd graders, which I do miss. I do get a lot of hugs from my 4th graders, but it's more so from the girls. A lot of the boys are like, oh, it's not cool to hug your teacher, which is fine, you know, whatever. Like, I can accept that, but I do miss just getting those hugs from my students because it really just makes me feel like I am that positive influence on their life and that they trust me and that they do love and care about me as much as I love and care about them. I also felt like 2nd graders kind of like bought into themed activities better. So if I was doing a classroom transformation or something like that, my 4th graders did buy into it, but I had some of the kids who were like, if I'm dressed up as a pirate, they're like, no, you're Miss Ferré. And I'm trying to say, no, like I'm Captain Jackie Sparrow. And they just didn't buy into it as much as the younger students do, and I do miss that. Next, I wanted to talk about some differences in classroom management between 2nd grade and 4th grade. One of the first things I noticed is that 4th grade graders didn't seem to need as many like gimmicks, and maybe gimmicks isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. Those little tips and tricks that you have to use. I actually have a video all about classroom management hacks. I will link it down in the description. It's really old, so don't judge me for it. But I didn't have to use as many of those things with the older students. I really feel like those are more so for primary students. And I feel like that really comes down to the fact that fourth graders have more focus, whereas second graders, you have to do so many like little tasks and you're transitioning so often and you need all of those classroom management strategies to keep them on task. Whereas the fourth graders, they're kind of used to it by now. They can sit and do an activity for longer and they just don't need as much to keep them on task. I also felt like with my fourth graders, it was a lot more individualized and I didn't need as many whole class incentives as I did with my second graders. Now, obviously I did do individualized classroom management strategies for my students in second grade, but I just didn't need it as often. Whereas with the fourth graders, most of the time I didn't even really use whole group classroom management strategies. I really just had to target those students who needed support in certain areas. Now at my new school, we do use a school-wide incentive system called Cub Kudos, where each student had a Cub Kudo card and then they could earn stamps when they were on task or focused or doing what they were supposed to be doing, and then they could redeem that for different prizes. I didn't have to use a lot of other classroom management strategies. That worked for a majority of the students, and honestly, some of them didn't even need it. I had students who were like, nah, like I don't need stamps, I don't need prizes. I'm like, okay, great, you're intrinsically motivated. But for those students who did need extrinsic motivation, that usually worked for them. But of course, there were a couple students who needed a little bit of extra support, maybe with paying attention, staying on task, something like that, and I would create a more individualized system for them. Now, as always, I believe that forming relationships with your students is the best classroom management strategy that you can ever use. That was important in second grade, it's still important in fourth grade, and it really shows that I did form relationships with my students because when they would fill that Cub Kudo card and they would get a prize, almost always my students chose lunch bunch, which would mean that they would come back to my room and they would eat lunch with me, and I loved that. Number one, because it doesn't cost any money. Number two, because I get more one-on-one time with my students. And number three, it just helps to foster that relationship even more. But I will add in there, fourth graders love dum-dums. That was always another option for them. I didn't have too many students who chose that. Most of them did choose a lunch bunch, but dum-dums also work. Now, one thing I did notice with second graders is that they tended to feed off of each other's behavior a lot more than my fourth graders. And what I mean by that was in second grade, if I had a couple of kids who kind of got silly and they start laughing and then other kids start laughing at them and they all just feed into each other. Whereas with my fourth graders, if I had a couple of kids who were talking or they were being silly, a lot of times the rest of the kids were like, no, like I'm trying to pay attention, I'm trying to focus. So that was just another difference that I noticed between the two grades. Next, I wanted to talk about differences in the content between second grade and fourth grade. Now, one huge difference for me is that this past year teaching fourth grade, I was departmentalized, which meant that our students switched classes and I just taught math, science, and social studies, and then my students would go to another teacher for ELA. So we had a homeroom group of kids, I had a block 1 group of kids, and a block 2 group of kids. Whereas when I taught second grade, we were actually self-contained, so I had the same group of students all day long and I taught them all the subjects. Now here soon, I am going to do a video comparing departmentalization versus being self-contained because I have gotten a lot of questions about that and which one I prefer and the differences between the two, so don't worry, that is coming. But in terms of content, the biggest difference I noticed is that fourth grade had a lot more content and a lot more difficult content. I'll be honest, this past year, I constantly felt like I was rushed and I felt like I was behind and I felt like I wasn't going to get in all the content before the testing. Now, part of that probably is because it was my first year teaching that grade level, so I didn't really know the progression of the content, and we were getting a new math curriculum this past year, and there were times where like we could not see what the next unit was because it wasn't available yet. So that was a little bit frustrating and it made it more difficult to kind of plan out the units. But I've talked to other fourth grade teachers and they all agree that fourth grade is just very content heavy and it's difficult content and you do always feel like you're behind. Now, I will say that is kind of stressful as a teacher, especially in Maryland. We do participate in PARCC testing, which if you don't know what that is, it's a big standardized test that our students take in the spring, along with taking district tests throughout the school year. And that's a lot, especially when you feel like you're not going to be able to get all the content in time. And it takes a big toll on you, but I always just had to remind myself I'm doing the best that I can for my students. And every single day we're working hard and we're practicing and I'm pulling the students who need extra help and I'm trying to challenge the students who need to be pushed beyond that. And ultimately that's all that I can do. And it is a lot of content to get in. But if you are teaching an older, like intermediate grade level and you feel like that, that, just know that it's okay and your students are gonna be okay and you are doing the best that you can for them. I also noticed that 4th grade builds so much on the prior grade levels, especially in math, and that definitely was true of 2nd grade as well. Like 2nd grade math skills build so much on 1st grade math skills and kindergarten math skills, but the difference is with 4th grade, that's building on kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, and 3rd grade. So what that means is if a student has kind of started to fall behind, it's only going to show more and more as they go up in the grade levels if they don't get caught back up. And because of that, I felt like it was a lot harder to kind of break down those preconceived ideas of intelligence within my students. And here's what I mean by that. In 2nd grade, I had some students who were like, oh, I'm bad at math or I'm bad at reading, but I felt like it was a lot easier to show them like, no, look, you really can grow, you can learn, you're getting better at it, and you're not bad at math or you're not bad at reading, and you can be really good at it. Whereas by 4th grade, some of the students have been behind in math for several years now or behind in reading for several years, and they catch on to that a lot more in the older grades. So I felt like it was a lot more difficult to kind of help some of those students who would constantly break down with math skills or would constantly break down with reading because they felt like they weren't good at it, because they hadn't been good at it for so many years. And I really kind of tried to make that my mission throughout the school year, was these students who thought that they weren't good at something to show them that they can be. And sometimes they need more time than another student, but that's not a bad thing. I just think that it's so important because when I was in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, I was really struggling with reading. I was in reading intervention programs and I needed a lot of help, and I kind of gotten to the point where I hated reading. I didn't think I was good at it. My sister was way better at it than me, so like I didn't even want to try. And it was something I really had to work on and I needed a lot of support in to get better. But by the time I got to middle school and high school, I was above reading level. I was getting all A's. I had a 4.2 GPA, but I didn't start that way. So I just think it's important to be able to spread that message to our students. Now, on the other side of this, when I was in 2nd grade, I did feel like I had a lot more time to spend on particular topics. And if my students were really struggling with something like, let's say, 3-digit subtraction, I could spend a lot more time on it. Whereas with 4th grade, I feel like I'm constantly just moving on and I don't have an entire week to spend practicing a skill. I have 2 or 3 days and then I have to move on to the next thing. And looking at the standards overall, there's a lot less content in 2nd grade than there is 4th grade. So it makes total sense, but it's difficult because in 4th grade, the topics do get more difficult and like you want to spend more time on them, but you just can't because there's so much to cover. So now what some of you have probably been waiting for all the time, I get asked, which grade level do you prefer teaching, 2nd grade or 4th grade? So drum roll please. I never thought that I would say this ever, but I actually do prefer teaching 4th grade. Now hear me out. I always thought that I was meant to teach 2nd grade. When I got my first teaching job in 2nd grade, I was ecstatic. I was like, I'm never gonna leave 2nd grade. I'm gonna teach 2nd grade the rest of my life. I just felt like that's where I was destined to be. And I'll be honest, when I got the call for the interview for my current teaching job and I went in and they said 4th grade, I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. I was actually scared. Like I did not want to teach 4th grade. I wasn't optimistic about it. But it wasn't until I actually got in the classroom, started working with the 4th grade students, that I realized I loved it. Personally, I just love the combination of their increased independence. I love the fact that they understand sarcasm, and I love the fact that I can form deeper relationships with them. And looking back on it, I think it makes a lot of sense to me. I've never been like the typical primary type teacher where like you sit down on the carpet and you're like, all right, friends, we're gonna read a book today. Like that is not me whatsoever. Like I said, I'm super sarcastic. I love to joke around with my students and kind of give them a hard time. And that just works so much better for intermediate grades than it does primary grades. So that being said, I just want the overall message of this video to be, don't be afraid to change grade levels. I know it's scary and I know it's overwhelming, and sometimes you don't always have a choice. Your administrator may move you to a different grade level, and sometimes you're scared because you're like, no, this is the grade level I'm supposed to be in. But don't write anything off until you try it, because you never know what grade level you may actually fall in love with. That is all that I have for you all today. So I really hope that this video was helpful for you and just gave you a little bit of insight between some of the differences between grade levels. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps me out and it helps this video be able to reach more teachers. Share this video out if you have teacher friends or you know someone who's wanting to become a teacher and they don't know what grade level they want to teach. Give it to them. Maybe it can help them out as well. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you are notified every time I post a new video. As always, thank you so much for watching. I love you all so much. Don't forget to think positive, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of this video and for supporting my YouTube channel. If you want to check out any of my older videos, you can use the 2 links right down here. If you want to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future videos, you can use the link right up here. The links to all of my social media sites, my Teachers Pay Teacher store, my merchandise store, and my Amazon store are in the description box, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.